Welcome to the Transforming Healthcare Coaching Podcast, where we're all about helping healthcare professionals like you create positive change at work, at home, and everywhere in between. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Transforming Healthcare Coaching Podcast. And this week, we're going to be talking about overcoming obstacles in our goal accomplishments. This time of year, we have all kinds of dreams and hopes and aspirations, and already some of us have fallen off the horse and actually have not accomplished much for the last several weeks. So this episode is all about getting granular when the times are tough. And goal setting is hard enough when you're a healthcare provider because there's so many times when we feel exhausted, we have way too long of a to-do list, so many emergencies that come up randomly in your day that you can't expect, whether it be personal or clinical, and not much time to bounce back for your own personal goals. So this past month, we've been taking a deep dive into goal setting, and this episode is actually talking about what to do when things don't go as prepared, when things stand in your way. And so I'm joined by one of our coaches, Dr. Grizelda Anguiano, and I just give her a chance to say hi and see what her perspective is about this whole thing about falling off the horse.
Hello, hello. Yes. And I think that it's always good to kind of reevaluate where we're at and where we're going. And just because we don't reach or we're not as successful as we wanted to be, it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily start from scratch or just throw that goal away. So I'm excited to jump in.
Awesome. So what common obstacles that healthcare providers have when they're trying to achieve their own goals that you have found?
I mean, I think some of it's going to be the shift work. Ideally, can I only take a call from the hours where my kids are in school? No. That would be nice. But I think it's just agreeing for the shift work and then also just the internal blocks as far as I want to do so much, but I'm exhausted or I have so much on my to-do list that I need to really work on time management. I mean, there's so many different types of blocks that can come up for us.
Yeah, I would agree with externally. Sometimes I feel like everybody else's needs come first. And when that emergency comes, you're just like, okay, I'll deal with it. If my kid has a problem or my partner has a problem, I'll go deal with that one first. And then the other one we often find is, you really brainstorm what's going to get in your way. And sometimes we get in our own way and you're just too tired and you just succumb to self-care and wanting to just relax and do nothing and scroll the Instagram and actually not spend the 15 minutes that you said you were going to do, taking a walk, being more active, doing something related for your healthcare goals, for example. And so I think a good categorization that I think both of us are suggesting is that thinking about well, what's happening externally, what may be perceived to me, and thinking about what agency and choice we have to either accept that as something that's going to happen or not. And then also realizing and noticing the harder work is to recognize we often sabotage ourselves. I don't know. Is there any other situations where you have found with your clients where their self-sabotage comes up?
And I think it's when we're in the deeper throes or, we're coming from conflict or being a victim, like, oh, I can't control anything. I think that it's a lot heavier, right? I think that the one thing that I know adopted for myself, and I know that I, try to shine light on that with my clients is about just, how are we looking at it? How are we choosing to look at it? And I know, and it's awesome when we finally accept and realize that we need to fill our cup first, right? So even though it's, yes, we're used to, coming from that service, especially in this industry, right? We're healthcare professionals and we want to serve and be there. And we do empathize with everyone as far as when they're ill or when something's going on. But sometimes, or now more than ever, I have to remind myself, am I taking care of myself? If I was on the other side, what would I be advising? Or even for my own kids, right? What am I doing for them that I would expect, my clients to be doing?
I love that so much. And I really love how you brought up the point about when you feel like you're a victim. Because I hear this all the time, actually, with my colleagues, that they're just like, I can't believe this is happening to me. And it's not my fault. Or why does this always happen to me? Like, why does that last minute patient or this emergency come in and that you feel like you never have choice? And I just want to comment the fact that those emotions and those feelings really are the symptom, the warning for exactly what you're talking about, is that we need to take a beat, we need to take a breath, we need to take a slow down, we need to get a perspective shift, we need to figure out how to make the glass half full when the glass is actually feeling half empty. And I get a lot of pushback actually sometimes when not sometimes. Half the time I get some pushback. And the other half the time I will find that people are like, "Yeah, you're right. I do just need to take a breath," and they appreciate noticing just having a second to themselves. I'm wondering, how do you support people through all those strong emotions of when things are so hard and you feel like the world's ganging up on you?
I think the biggest part of any relationship is going to be acknowledging that and validating. So sometimes it's understandable if you feel that, it's all happening to you. And so, yes, if you think that just because you got someone coming late and they came in for, yeah, I just remember it in the ER, right? If they came in for constipation, you're like, are you kidding me? Did you take the ER and you had stuff, you came in the ambulance to the ER for constipation or for however, but still it's understanding that they were in pain and something was going on. And it's what am I here to do? And how am I serving this patient or even our colleagues? Right. Because we have that if one starts complaining and then we all start complaining and versus is can we be not necessarily the bigger picture, but just come from a growth mindset to say like, okay, this keeps happening. How can we approach it differently? Or how do we, maybe you go take a break and then I'll cover for a little bit or however to help each other out.
Yeah, that's true. I love that. Sometimes when we're starting to get super irritated, it's really helpful when somebody else just volunteers, like, "Hey, I'll take care of it," you know? And I am always grateful for that moment when someone else like, I'll take care of it." I'm like, "Really? You'll take care of it? Thanks." I mean, in some ways, it's like, "Thanks for noticing that I just don't have capacity. I'm a bit tapped out."
And it's tough because especially as we get higher in our careers, we feel that we forget that sometimes, our superhero capes get stuck sometimes, we're like, no, no, but I can do it. I can do it. So sometimes allowing other people to help, knowing that we will be able to tap into, our higher selves and do better when we are more present.
Yeah, I find this one of those things where people have a really hard time asking for help. People, I don't know why, and I see it in myself as well, that and yet all of the people in healthcare generally love to help. And so we're actually depriving them of a gift to be able to feel good. We're actually depriving them of simple little ways. If you just ask for the help and someone can give it, you've actually strengthened the bond. But we never think of it that way. We always think we're just burdening somebody for some reason. Again, we're seeing the glass is half empty. When actually, even in little things, like, can you get that IV for me? Or would you be able to help me with, this if I do this? Because then it becomes a partnership. And instead of intentionally choosing to actually allow people into your life, into your sphere, you create this pretend story to yourself that everything has to be done by you because only you can do it the way that you think you need to get it done. And we deprive ourselves of the gift of our colleagues and our friendships.
Absolutely. And just kind of thinking about what you were saying, it's, if you help with this and I can help, just thinking about the synergy, right? And working together. It's like, I'm not saying, oh, yeah, if you take care of that, Lily, then I get to go and, play a video game or do something or just go take a nap. Well, sometimes we might need the nap. But I think it's just saying, saying yes to you is I'm going to be and no to me taking care of this and I'm going to be able to say yes to something else. I think just the whole of being appreciative of when someone is there to help us, right? Or the support systems.
Yeah, for me, my greatest learning has been these last 10 years being a mom, a single mom, and asking my mom friends to actually help. And if it weren't for all of these other women, I have no idea how I would do it. And it was very humbling in the beginning. And I was just like, I guess I just need to ask. And the answer is always yes. And if I always thank them a lot, and I do. I give gifts, like all kinds of things, right? Because in the end of the day, it's like you do feel good, right? You can accidentally overgive, and yet at the same time, if it's the right amount of giving, it really does strengthen long-term friendships, and it actually helps everything happen. And there are opportunities where I can give back in some way.
Absolutely. And I think even with, I know, especially at the beginning of training as a hospitalist, we had a nanny when the kids were really young because my husband left early and sometimes I was working the night shift or however. And so it was just getting that support, but even more also just being okay with not doing all of the things that I thought I have to do. I wanted to be the one to pick up from daycare. Well, my husband could do that too. And he was willing to do it, but I just had to ask, right? And I felt like, well, no, I have to do all the mom stuff. And it doesn't have to be like that, right? I think it's just if I come home and I'm going to be ready to be part of the family and participate, it doesn't matter how many things I accomplished on myself, it's for the whole, just like with any.
Yeah. So funny. Like, this is how the external and internal stories and situations happen to us, and we completely fabricate the solutions to be the only one. And it's so funny. So, what we call this anchoring bias, right? In learning, in terms of you anchor to the what we think is going to be the only way to do things. And yeah, there's so many more ways. And you sort of already led us into like the next part I want to talk about, which is, well, we set goals and sometimes we have to change course. And the reality, things do happen, right? So sometimes we get things like we break a leg, we get a serious medical condition, we actually have to undergo very treatment intensive things that actually are going to require us to shift priorities completely, right? A new diagnosis for any healthcare provider, for all of you battling cancer and dealing with major medical problems, it is a huge shift in priority. And it can be very emotionally hard, primarily because you have to give up in some ways of the things that you thought you were gonna accomplish this year, all of our dreams and goal setting we've talked about last month. And so, as you coach your clients, through these types of things, Griselda, how do you help them figure out what needs to change? Like, what is it they have to do to kinda deal with things that might require changing course or shifting priorities?
Yeah. I mean, one of the first things that I like to ask is just what's a story are telling yourself about what's happening? Because there's always a story. And sometimes it's, even asking, well, I'm thinking this, well, obviously I wasn't supposed to do it. Well, how true is that? And so asking those questions to say, well, it's not 100% true. It's like, well, what's another way of looking at it? Right. So sometimes it's a reframing. And a lot of times we set unrealistic expectations. If I set out, I'm going to run a marathon, but I've never run a 5K. I don't even have tennis shoes, right? So it's keeping in mind that if I said I want to run a marathon, like, wow, it seems like you really want to work on your fitness. Is there any other way that we can work on fitness and not have to be, 26.2 gruesome miles? So I think it's just sometimes we have to just shift a little bit, the way we're saying reframe or shifting or just, relook like, okay, that can still be my goal, but yet I don't have to do it in the first quarter.
I love that. So, what I'm hearing you say is talk a little bit more about aiming more correctly and smartly with your goals, things that we talked about last month, is being willing to readjust, when necessary, and also tweaking and modifying the process. I think for me, a lot of times asking about structures of support, because to some degree, we're only as good as what our calendar or our environment or our habits make us. So to me, I always ask a little bit more about like, well, walk me through like a regular day of where we can find the triggers and the cues so that you're set up for success. Because if the system's good, you can't do anything else but to succeed. And so a lot of times we just sabotage ourselves because it's like, well, we actually, like you said, could actually ask a partner to go do something when you actually could spend those 30 minutes doing the dream of writing a book or going to exercise and just thinking outside the box of the solutions. We think that we've already got the right answer the first time, that we don't stop and rethink about like, well, let's reevaluate the weekly process. Maybe there's something funny with the weekly process that can maybe be benefited.
Yeah, and just going back to the way you said, breaking a leg, literally, it's just in the preparation for that marathon, was I doing too much? Right? Was I not, stretching enough or was I not doing certain things? So maybe I do need to take a break. And sometimes I think when we get sick or we get so tired that we actually need to sleep more, do different things, is just what else could that mean? Like, is it just like, oh, I guess I'm not supposed to meet that goal? Or it's, what do I need to do? Right? Do I need other supports? Do I need some training on how to, give my body the break? Maybe not just pounding on it this way, but let me do some swimming or let me do something else to kind of support the overall arching goal.
Yeah, and it's even taking the breaking the leg or analogy a little bit further, for someone I know that opportunity of actually breaking a orthopedic portion of themselves allowed them the opportunity to get so fit now in the rehab process. Like, obviously, it takes a long, extended physical therapy rehabilitation time, but it opened a whole new world for someone I know where basically they started actually now training for the 5K and doing these things. And they never were a runner before this, and they didn't even know a thing about running. And it's one of those things where when we look at these, what's quote unquote horrible events to us, the faster that we can find the strategy and the opportunity in it becomes a mind game with yourself, right? Because then you're just like, well, I'm going to just do this instead. And in some ways, it does take a physical ailment for us to stop in our tracks. I often tell that all the time that it took big things like becoming a mother to actually change my old habits to make better new ones.
Yeah. And I think sometimes what we need to also consider is it really what I need right now? Or is it really what I want right now? Is it a different goal that I need to set? So yeah,
Yeah.
reframing is key.
Yeah, and reevaluating. And
Mm.
also always like what I'm hearing you say is that, when we began with our why, began with our purpose, how do we anchor it? Does this change anything about the why and the purpose? It may or may not, right? And other times it might, and both are okay. And I think the other thing to really comment on, and I think anyone who coaches people in healthcare will agree to this statement that we are resilient, smart, talented, caring people as a whole in healthcare. And so another thing that we often find in the philosophies of coaching is with strength-based coaching is how can we lean on our strengths to deal with the things that stand in the way of our goals? I'm just curious um, for your perspective on that.
Yeah, I think it's always looking at it, what's worked in the past, or, how do I typically train, or how do I typically structure my day, or the opposite, right? It hasn't been working out for me. What's worked out in the past, and let me try something new, or how do we, again, leaning into the supports? What does someone else do? Do I need to get a scheduling software or something to kind of help me keep, how do I prioritize and how do I, manage my time? I mean, I think there's so many different things but yes, healthcare is just like a whole different situation where the shift work or the actual life and death stuff comes up and we have to pivot and change and rearrange what we might be planning to do that day or even that week.
Yeah. And I think it's a strength of ours. And I think that's what people often forget is that we actually have much more inside us capacity wise than we realize. We do on a day to day basis and just don't recognize it. So part of it is actually just recognizing, whenever I ask my clients about this, well, it has worked in the past and how could that be extrapolated to this situation? They realize, oh, well, this worked in this particular either studying mode or finding a job mode or a leadership role. And I'm like, oh, well, this actually translates to this particular problem I have now. I could try this. And I'm like, you are correct. Because I mean, there's no way that if you're a practicing healthcare provider in the United States right now, there's no way you haven't fallen down, gotten back up, had seen some terrible things, experienced trauma, experienced moral injury, and are still there and still doing it and still caring and still talented. And so, thinking about what skills you use to get through that, what supports you use to get through that, and how can you extrapolate it to a new situation is something that we often forget about.
Absolutely. And just going back to, why am I doing this or why is this important to me?
Yeah. The other hard thing that we often find in healthcare professionals, especially because we are such a many of us are type A perfectionists, right? So the obstacles can often feel like a failure, actually, to healthcare professionals. And just about every single person I know in healthcare literally self flagellates themselves for mistakes that they can't even control. And it's really not within their wheelhouse. It's totally not even controllable. They can't fix it. And yet they blame themselves for an outcome that is meant to be and or mistakes that they think they contributed to. And so how can we reframe mistakes for our clients so that they develop a more empowered growth mindset? Because mistakes, are very poorly tolerated in most healthcare settings.
Absolutely. And I think it's bringing to mind one of the questions that was on, that maintenance of certification stuff that we have to do. And it was just saying, like, this mistake happened. What do you do? Do you, sweep it under the rug? Do you tell someone? But, and the right answer was to report it, right? Let's report this mistake that happened. So it's the transparency. And that way we can figure out, how do we not keep going through that same mistake again? And just like asking questions, right? It's likely that someone else has the same question. So if something comes up in your mind, ask it. If there's a mistake that happens, or I'd like to see it as an opportunity instead of a mistake, but why did that happen? Was I rushing? Do I need additional training? Do I need additional support? Should I not even be trying to do this on my own? So I think if it's something that keeps on happening, why aren't we learning from it? So I think it just depends in what situation, but I think anything that happens, it's why. Why did it happen that way? Do I want it to continue to go that way, or do I choose to see it differently or approach it differently?
I really appreciate that approach because it's really that sort of what M&M or postmortems or case reviews is sort of the way we learn in healthcare in general. And of course, all of those words just now made people's like, oh, shiver, like while they're listening to it, like, oh God, like flashback. And then everyone's sweating already too. Like even just saying the word M&M, people are like sweating in their car right now listening to us. And yet, it's also with what patient safety and peer review does is actually bring to light. It's when we hide the shame and we hide the things inside us and we own them, internalize them. That's why we're sick. This is why we don't talk about these problems. We don't analyze and get through it together because in no M&M and in no peer review, everyone has been through this similar situation, right? Like literally accidentally mistaking something, pulling from the wrong drawer, reading the wrong box, flipping, onto something and like never had any experience. Where sometimes these errors are then cause packaging, complete nationwide packaging redos because we realize that more than one company decided to brand something a certain way. And so without speaking up, without people who are really invest their passion, their life, and their career for patient safety and quality improvement in healthcare, their goal really is to try to make it safer to actually speak up and say something. And yet we don't do it in our own lives. We don't do it at work. And it's one of the hardest things when we internalize it. Then of course we can't keep making the same old habits, the same old mistakes.
Yeah, and I don't know why the phrase "I'm sorry" kept coming to mind right now. That it's we feel like we're already rehearsing how we're going to say something when we realize something didn't go as expected. But I think it's, instead of saying, "Oh, I'm so embarrassed," it's like, How am I going to fix this? How am I going to learn from this?" Or, we do well when we can, right? I love that saying too, right? And kids and people just do well when they can. So what got in the way? I think that's where we have to see if there was a mistake, if something went wrong. Do we need an SOP? Do we need, someone else looking at it from a different perspective? But that way we're coming from the right place and we weren't intending to make a mistake or do it. And so looking at it differently always helps.
Yeah. And in our own lives, the reality is like you didn't wake up wanting to make mistakes. And I think the hard thing is that we perceive them that way. And I think one thing I've learned in this whole entrepreneurial journey, doing this kind of creative work, creating a podcast is the more often you can embrace and love the bloopers and the mistakes, the faster you'll learn. And so really all of last year was all about how fast can I do this? How fast can I figure out something, try it, fail, move on, try something else? Because the faster you learn, then you're not festering in some kind of quote unquote mistake. And learning is slower. In many ways, the faster you can get to where you want to go is by getting up and trying again. And so actually you want a lot of mistakes, but no one in healthcare ever wants to hear that because so much of our professional identity comes into our personal lives, even when it comes to weight loss or making a travel plan. It's like it has to be just so. And actually, you know what? You might need some supports. You might need to actually go to, oops, I shouldn't have booked that. Let me cancel that trip. Let me find this agent instead. There's all different things that actually have to happen. And through the doing actively as quickly as possible, you make the blooper and you move on and then you're better for it.
Yeah. And sometimes it's what more education do I need? Right. Maybe I thought I knew because I saw it, but I wasn't, properly trained or I didn't, have someone oversee. But I think it's being able to admit and stand up to say, I don't want to mess up. I don't want this to continue to happen. How can I do it better?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because actually I think that's actually how sometimes our clients come to us finally, where after months or maybe years of struggling of like I have unfulfilled dreams, I have unfulfilled stagnation in my career. They're just like, well, I've tried therapy, I've tried my mentor, I've tried these degrees, I've tried everything else. Heck, why not? Why don't I try coaching? So it's funny you actually say that because I find a lot of our clients come to us with that well, what else have I got to lose at this point? Because I've tried all different things, which is actually quite wise because you do have to try different things for size and for what works for one person, which is why people will give you the advice. Oh, just go do this training program and all will be well. And one training program doesn't make everything perfect for any one individual.
Absolutely. And I think what comes up a lot is when we want either that one degree or that, now let me get that certification or let me do this. And are we really just that outcome orientation, or how am I becoming the better me? Right. I really value creating that impact, or really value creating the change that I want to see in others. And it's just sometimes it's looking at it different too. It's not, do I have to get a certain, and of course it depends, right? There's always going to be those metrics. But still, it's how are we setting that for ourselves? And are we growing the way we want to?
Funny you say that because that actually sort of leads into my ending for this podcast, actually, is if you had to give a couple takeaways or maybe just one takeaway from your perspective that you'd like to share about how to accomplish goals, especially when it comes to overcoming the obstacles that get in your way, what would that be for you, Grizelda?
I'm going to go back to the validating. I'm going to go back to just, acknowledging that if you set a goal, realize that you set it for a reason and consider what the value behind that was and why you want to do it. So, it may seem like a setback, but don't stay on the floor, right? Let's get up and let's move forward.
I love that. So I'm hearing you say it's the why and it's the who you are because
Mhm.
you can't negate that. And if you go back to that, then everything else will become clear. And for me, actually, I think it's the micro processes. If you actually appreciate the micro processes along the way, then you may get to a brand new goal you didn't even know you had. And so rather than being with the fixed outcome and sort of those metrics, if you fixate on that, that's probably all you're going to get. And so instead, if you focus on what are the strategies and what is the scaffolding, what is the infrastructure for how you're getting there, then you actually may go to a completely even more amazing place than your metric determines.
Untapped potential.
Yes. So we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Transforming Healthcare Coaching podcast. Please share with a friend, like, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to us. And we want to stay in the loop with you. So if you're willing, like and share and follow our podcast and come check out our newsletter. Sign up at our website, transforminghealthcarecoaching.com. For different topics you want us to cover, please email podcast@transforminghealthcarecoaching.com and be on the lookout for new things we have coming for 2025. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe and share with a colleague who would benefit. Together, we can transform healthcare one person at a time. Find us anywhere you find your podcasts. Ready to take your healthcare leadership journey to the next level? Book a discovery call free at transforminghealthcarecoaching.com to explore our personalized coaching packages designed specifically for healthcare professionals like you.